Good evening. My name is Marcus Decker, and I'm here to talk to you today about the habit Covey forgot. It's a story from Daniel chapter 6. So, many years ago, Stephen Covey wrote a great book. It was back in 1989 when the book came out, and over 20 million copies have been sold. So, it was a pretty big deal. The book was called The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And all Covey had done is he had studied a whole bunch of, very effective people, and he distilled his observations down into seven very practical habits. The book is still as valid today as it was back then. It is used in business schools. It is used in all kind of environments. And of course, there are offsprings, highly effective housewives and teens and all kinds of amazing stories. I have it on my bookshelf at home, and I actually do return to it every now and then. And all of those seven habits are really good, and we can benefit from studying them. And Covey wrote his book from the perspective of people in the business world, and that was his intended target audience, I would guess. He was a man of faith, but the book is not at all about spiritual disciplines. Foster and others have written more about the perfect habits of the faithful believer. And when I was studying our text that we're going to look at today, I realized there was a pattern here because the main character of our story had a habit that he stuck with even when times got tough. And that's what this is about. Let us dive into the story. So, our story comes to us from the books of the Old Testament. And you don't have to memorize all these details, but you kind of know the sequence, right? God created the world, kicked Adam and Eve out of the paradise, wanderings in the desert, off into the promised land, and finally they get the kingdom, right? Finally, they have their goal, they have their king. And yeah, things just don't go that well. The kingdom splits into northern and southern kingdom. After a while, the northern kingdom is invaded, and eventually it ceases to exist. Around 722, God raises the Assyrians, and they basically wipe the northern kingdom off the map. Just like Moses had predicted many years ago when he talked about the blessing and he talked about the curse. The Assyrians then, in return, got wiped out by the Babylonians, the next world empire. And in about 612, the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, remember Jonah, the dude and the fish, fell to the Babylonians. Well, about 2 centuries later, the kingdom of Judah suffers a fate very similar to one of the northern kingdom for the same reasons: discontinued obedience and continued rebellion against God. And they had been invaded by the Babylonians. So Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem 605. We read that in chapter 1 of the book that we're about to look at. And it was God that gave the king of Judah into his hand. God is sovereign, as always. And Nebuchadnezzar even carried off some of the vessels of the house of God. You remember they had pieces of gold and pieces of silver that were used for certain things, and he took all of that. And in several waves, people were forced to give up their homes and move to a faraway land, away from their cities and fields, but also away from their worship and their temple into a foreign land with strange gods, a different language, different cultures, and very different customs. Daniel was probably among the first that were deported, and Ezekiel, another guy, followed later. And this all, at the end of the day, just fulfills God's judgment. Babylon was an impressive city, and this is an impression from the real Babylon. Well, not quite where it is today, because this is the Ishtar Gate, and you can see that in a museum in Berlin in Germany today. It's very impressive. I've been there. I mean, you stand in front of it. It's huge. It's like about 30, 35 feet tall. And on that gate, you actually see an inscription that says, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the pious prince appointed by the will of Marduk. Marduk was one of the gods they had. And they had a lot. This was a part of a big processional alley. And so they had friezes and reliefs on both sides. And one of them actually shows two striding lions that you can see here. I mean, beautifully done with these glass colored stones, and kind of like a mosaic, but those things are huge. Um, so as you can tell, when I'm talking about Babylon, and the guy I'm going to talk about today is Daniel, and we're looking at the book of Daniel today. It's one of the books in the Old Testament. It is prophecy, as we consider it, not in the Jewish tradition, because they do believe that prophecy ended with Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi. 9 of the 12 chapters in Daniel contain revelations and prophecies that are given to Daniel by God in dreams and visions. We're not going to go into those today. That would be a whole nother series of sermons. But Daniel still was a mouthpiece of God. He was announcing God's current and future plans for this world and the world to come. And basically, what the book of Revelation is to the New Testament, Daniel is to the Old Testament. One more side note, the book was originally not written in Hebrew, but in Aramaic, and it spans the entire 70 years of the Babylonian exile. But let's look at our main character. So we have Daniel. He's one of many young men from Israel that are taken to Babylon with the intent to re-educate them. See, Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, was smart. They did not look to annihilate the people that they had conquered, but to assimilate those foreign nations. Basically try to sell them on the fact that, hey, Babylon has the better culture. So what they did, they took some of the brightest and best, they brought them to their country, they taught them the language and learnings of the Chaldeans. They even gave them new names. And why did they do that? Well, because all of their old names were connected to God in the Hebrew language. And they wanted their new names also to reflect their affiliation with the new deities of the new land. And we know Daniel and his three friends were part of that re-education, resettlement program. We know their names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And all those names at fascinating meanings. And just looking at the name Daniel, Daniel means God is my judge, or God judges me. And the new name he was given, that is only mentioned once, is Belteshazzar, which means Bel, and Bel is Marduk, protects the king. So it's not really an improvement from Daniel's perspective, because he stays faithful to the real God. And it seems Daniel also stuck to his original name, because in his book that he probably wrote himself, he's continually referred to by his original name. So very early on, we learn about Daniel and his three amigos that they had no intent to ever give up on their original faith, on their original identity. They had made up their mind. Even as young kids, the assumption is that they were probably abducted when they were around 15, 16 years old and brought to this foreign land, and they were supposed to be given meat and wine off the king's table. But they had made up their mind that they were not going to do that. On this old painting from the 18th century, you see the clear no. They had made up their mind. We're not going to do that. Please just give us veggies and give us water. So they went on a diet that maybe some of us would consider healthy and others wouldn't. But the result was amazing. They came out healthier and better than all of their peers. And God gave them knowledge and intelligence. But this was just the beginning of their story. In our world, we sometimes have a very misleading understanding of what it means to be holy. It doesn't mean that we are saints, no offense to the Central students. It doesn't mean that we have an amazing halo over our heads. It doesn't mean that we're better than others. It just means we're different. Holy Week is just different from other weeks. The Holy Sabbath is a different day than the other 6 days of the week. Being holy just means being different. And it can simply mean, as Daniel and his friends illustrate, not conforming to the culture or not succumbing to peer pressure. It can mean not watching a show or a movie that everyone keeps talking about, especially if it does things like normalize adultery or other behaviors, drug use, alcohol, things that are maybe incompatible with our faith. It can mean not participating in a conversation around the water cooler when gossip, rumors, or slander are spread. It can also mean the opposite, taking action, speaking up, doing something, defending someone or something, even when popular opinion is heading in a different direction. Take the high road, and you will have the high ground. So here we are, Daniel and his friends, strangers in a strange land. A lot has happened since the beginning of our story, and I don't have time here to go into all those details. Some of the stories are well known, and they make wonderful Sunday school illustrations. Daniel's three friends are thrown into a fiery furnace because they refuse to bow down and worship an idol statue. Visions and dreams are seen and interpreted by Daniel. The proverbial writing on the wall accurately predicts the end of that empire of Babylon and the dawn of a new era. The Medo-Persians are actually taking over from the Babylonians somewhere around 538 BC. And now we get to chapter 6, and so that's the story we're talking about. That's introduced with the fact that Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. What does a new manager do when he enters a company? Well, he of course starts with a major reorganization, and the new King Darius is no different. He restructures his vast empire. He puts governors in charge of the 120 provinces in the land, and he sets 3 top administrators over them to keep them in check. And these control mechanisms already show you that guy has some serious trust issues. But one thing the king knew, he could trust Daniel because he made Daniel one of his three top administrators, and he basically already planned to hand him the keys to the kingdom and make him the second in command. Now remember, this is the third king Daniel is serving during all this time in exile, and he's no longer a young man. This is what Darius looks like when he conquered the Babylonians. So he's now the super powerful guy. And remember, again, Daniel is serving the third king. Daniel is probably about 80 years old at this time. So he's been serving this king and this strange nation, actually the third king now, for 65 years, and he has not strained. He has not deviated from his faithful path, as we will soon find out. He knows earthly kings come and go, but he's serving the one real king in heaven. What do you think? How did the success of this foreigner make the natives feel? Well, let's put it that way. The other administrators are not quite as happy with the success of our fair-haired poster child, to say the least, and they band together to see what they can do to get rid of him. Here's the problem. Daniel is a boring guy, an absolute man of integrity. We read that he's trustworthy, we read that he's incorruptible, and he's faultless. And they keep searching for flaws, and they home in on his very predictable devotion to his God. So they run to the king with a fabricated story about everyone agreeing that the king should make an edict about prayer. Only pray to the king for 30 days. And the king falls for it. The king is weak. He never asks Daniel, his top administrator, for his opinion, and instead, the king's vanity and naivete are showing. It really demonstrates his ability and his lack of a moral compass. The most amazing is what happens now, and that is Daniel's reaction. He is totally unfazed by this. He doesn't panic, doesn't run away. When he hears of this new law, he goes to his apartment, and as always, the Bible says, as always, he just goes and prays to his God. As always, 3 times a day. For over 65 years, he has been doing this, and he's not going to let a new law change any of that. He knows from the book of Jeremiah, chapters 25 and 29, if you want to read it up, that the day of restoration was not far away. The end of the 70-year period was approaching. Here's an 80-year-old guy getting down on his knees 3 times a day, defying a law, obeying his God, worshiping, and thanksgiving. It's not bitching, moaning, and complaining. Sure, he could maybe just not have prayed for 30 days, because that's when the decree would expire. That is all it would have taken. Or he could have prayed in private, left the window closed. No one can see or hear it. I'm sure God hears. But he didn't. He kept his habit going. What a boring and predictable guy. Just like King David before him, if you look at Psalm 55, where it says, evening and morning and at noon I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. David was a prayer warrior, and so was Daniel. That man, he may have been helpless, but he sure wasn't hopeless. He does not start by whining and complaining. Instead, he begins with thanksgiving, then intercession, and then supplication. Once again, it really shows his heart. He has an attitude of gratitude. Focus on God, then on others, and last on himself. Do we see that in ourselves? Do we see that in others? People stick to their routine, their habit, no matter how difficult it will be. I did quite a few road trips with my dad, some of them international, and every morning, no matter how short the night had been, no matter where we were, he would always get up at 30 to do his quiet time, to read scripture, to meditate, and to pray. And even when he got older, in his 80s and in his 90s, most evenings at home were reserved for a time of Bible reading with his wife. What a boring habit. When Admiral William H. McRaven, he was a Navy SEAL for 36 years, and he was asked to give the commencement address at the University of Texas in Austin in 2014. He gave them a simple piece of advice. If you make your bed every morning, You will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task and another and another. By the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you will never do the big things right. Well, it is March 1st. How are we doing on our New Year resolutions? How are we doing on prayer time every morning? How are we doing on going to the gym and eating properly? Are we rocking it? Or have we fallen off the wagon? But let's go back to our story of Daniel. I think you may have heard this story before, but here you go. The plan of the conspirators initially succeeds. Daniel is accused by these tattletales. The king tries to weasel his way out of it, but at the end of the day, the king has to make good on his law, and Daniel is thrown into a den full of lions. The king seems to realize his mistake, and while he cannot undo it, he acknowledges that the God whom Daniel has faithfully served will rescue him. See, even the king knew about Daniel's boring habits. The king shows his own powerlessness because he, wannabe almighty king, has to rely on a strange foreign god to rescue his top administrator from the den of lions. After a sleepless night of tossing and turning, the king returns to the den and he speaks with a troubled voice and says, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Do you realize this is the king asking? What he's basically implying is, I was not able to do it, but maybe your king is more powerful than I am. Daniel answers, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime. Do you see the difference? The king, powerless and helpless, is trapped by the power of his own weakness in his luxurious chambers. And Daniel has perfect peace, surrounded by wild beasts. The king is mortal and unable to rescue Daniel. And just like the three amigos were joined by the Son of Man in the fiery furnace, Daniel was not alone with the lions. God's angel shut their mouths. What a great picture. And this is a painting I found that really illustrates Daniel once again looking out through a window, looking to God for the solution to his problems. He doesn't even care about the lions in the den. That story even made it into Hebrews 11, that great chapter on faith and the heroes of faith. And the king is relieved and maybe glad that God did that which he could not. Not a scratch was found on Daniel. And similar to Achan's story in Joshua 7, the perpetrators now get a taste of their own medicine. They are thrown to the lions with their wives, with their children. Yes, sin has consequences even beyond our person. Daniel walks free. At the end of our story, God is glorified by the king, who issues a new decree instructing people to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. There was something Daniel knew, something he trusted. He knew God saves. He knew that Yahweh equals salvation, that in him, only in him, there is deliverance. You know what that means in Hebrew? Here's your Hebrew lesson for today. Yehoshua, or abbreviated Joshua, actually means Yahweh is salvation. You know how Joshua is transliterated in Greek? It is Jesus. Seeing a pattern here? It's almost like one person wrote the Bible. Look, we know from Paul's letter to the Romans that the wages of sin is death. And we know from James's letter that patience has its perfect reward. He calls it perfection or completion. Daniel had made up his mind a long time ago. He was going to serve the one true king in thought, word, and deed. And it was visible throughout his long life in all of his actions. And even though he was a stranger in a strange land, And there was pressure to conform. He never strayed from his path. I'm sure he was tempted. I'm sure it wasn't easy. But he fought the good fight. He finished the race and he kept the faith. Daniel's resolve was visible in the mundane things, refusing meat and wine from the king's table in his teenage years, and sticking to his worship and prayer routine when his biggest trial came when he was old and advanced in years. Daniel did not stray. And Daniel is in great company. Martin Luther spoke to the Council of Worms when confronted with accusations of blasphemy and heresy, which implied the death penalty. And he said, "Here I stand. I cannot do any other. So help me God." Dietrich Bonhoeffer's final words before being led to the scaffold were, "This is the end, and for me the beginning of life." Totally unfazed. But it could be much simpler than that. Maybe less lethal. Probably nobody remembers the name Jack Phillips. He was a baker in Colorado who refused to make a cake for a gay wedding, and he paid a price. Or Kim David, a Kentucky clerk who lost her job because of her faith. She would not give marriage licenses to gay couples. And I'm sure none of those decisions happened in a vacuum. They were preceded often by small, regular actions of faith. Resolve leads to reward. Decide firmly on a course of action and stick to it. And faith requires action. Don't just hear the word, but do it. And show it in your everyday actions. Show it in the little things. Be faithful in the little things, and you will be given big things. And your faith will have its perfect reward. Thank you.